Thank you for being with us again, the Blend Talk. I love you guys. You have really been showing out. You have really been leaving those comments, and we just want to know how you are doing. Have you been using some of the information that we've been sharing? Did you get to watch the last episode when Dr. Lisa Lewis was talking about acupuncture? Were you inspired by that young Miguel when we were talking about closing the education gap? I'm still getting phone calls and text messages about people telling me that was a great show, and we love it when you connect with us and you give us that feedback, because we're here for you, and we're bringing so many different topics, things that you probably never even thought about. So make sure you continue to share and like and get your pens out and take notes, because we're bringing some groundbreaking information. We're bringing hope. This is what I love about the Blend Talk. We're bringing hope. And I know that sometimes it seems like it's a little dismal. We're going through this pandemic. I call it a corona coaster, up and down. And we're at a stage now where the curve is being flattened and we're seeing some changes. But you know what? As we discussed today about how the pandemic has affected those in the penal system, in prison and jail, because it's two different things. We're going to explore today how that has impacted women that have been really, really locked down. Because in the beginning of the pandemic, can you just imagine what a hotbed that must have been? We were trying to social distance, but they couldn't do it. They weren't getting the PPEs. They weren't getting the protective gear. They weren't getting the medication. But as the curve is starting to flatten, we want to look at what was happening in the early stages, what changes have been made, what improvements have been made. We want to embrace our sisters that are behind the wall. We know that everybody that's behind the wall in prison or in jail, maybe they're there for different reasons, but we don't want to treat them as invisible. We want to embrace them. We want to include them in the conversation. So if you know somebody, and you probably know somebody in your family or a coworker or somebody that you know that has been incarcerated, have you ever wondered how they have managed to get through this pandemic? Have you ever wondered how did they feel when they found out that a mother, a parent, a child, a friend, a spouse had died because of COVID? Have you ever wondered how someone on the outside must have felt knowing they couldn't access their loved one that was in a hotbed of contagious virus? We're going to explore some of those questions today, and I'm glad to have my girls with me today, Dr. Lisa Lewis and Dr. Karen McGibbon. We're going to talk about it today. How you guys doing, my girls? My
Good,
sisters, my
Dr.
sisters.
Jewel. Great to see you ladies again. Dr. Jewel, when you were talking about just the experience that you perceive of being incarcerated, I thought about the fear. That's a word that just came to me over and over, because just being incarcerated alone must bring so much fear. But COVID and being incarcerated, the fear, how do people cope with that amount of fear? That's what I really want us to look at, because today we're going to be talking to guests, as you will let us know who, Dr. Joel, who will help us to understand what the perspectives have been. But as a mental health professional, I can only assume that that fear must have been debilitating for a lot of those women, if not all of those women, who had to think about what COVID was doing to their families and possibly them while they were incarcerated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always think about the fact that we who are on the outside, were half of us were losing our minds, right? Couldn't get access to, masks and all the PPE and all the things that we were cleaning, Lysol and Clorox and toilet paper and all kinds of stuff that we couldn't get hold of, right? So just think about if we were having a challenge, imagine how they were being treated, right? Imagine what kind of access, like you talked about the social distancing. How is the possibility of social distancing? It's not happening. And so it spread so fast, so furiously. even when we talk about the workers, right, bringing it in, and, and then not being able to visit, there was just it was like one thing after another, after another, after another, and thank God most of it started to be addressed. But in the beginning, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine.
Yeah. This is why the two guests that we have today, Darlene Burke and Candy Lewis, who are soldiers, who are advocates for the marginalized community, they're going to help us today to focus on what we can do. What are the solutions? How can we be advocates? How can we restore hope at a time when people feel like they're just invisible and they're lost? And these are two ladies that I know personally here in the LA area. And I tell you, when I see the magnitude of the work that they're doing, the outreach that they have, everybody's not cut out to do what they do. And they're going to be bringing some great insight today, so we can really bring some hope to families that are watching this today and saying, you know what, I don't want to have this fear. I want to feel like my loved ones are going to be able to endure. They're going to shed some light on how maybe you, audience, may want to be a part of this advocacy, this movement, because we think the Blend Talk is like a movement. This is actually not just a show, it is a movement. Oh, come on, somebody. And so we're trying to move this train forward towards solutions and insights and activism and awareness and faith and so many things. This is why it's so exciting to be partnering with you, Dr. Lisa and Dr. Karen, because we're bringing that holistic view to our listeners, from the mind, the body, and the spirit, how to address the demons in our community, how to address those shortcomings, those inequities that we've been talking about in every show as we go through this pandemic.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, as you say, we get to be an advocate too in this role that we're playing. And we really do want to encourage all our audience viewers to think of themselves as advocates. But you know what? We're just getting started. And viewers, if you have never ever fully thought through what it must have been like for someone, man or woman, who was incarcerated to have to go through this experience of COVID as well, don't go anywhere, because after the break, our resident self-esteem doctor, Dr. Jewel Diamond Taylor, is going to be joined by our special guest, Mrs. Candy Lewis of Positive Results Center, and together, hopefully, they'll answer some of your questions.
Thank you for staying with us as we have a conversation about how COVID-19 is impacting women, brown and black, that are incarcerated. And we've got a perfect guest coming up right now. Mrs. Candy Lewis is the founder of Black Women Leaders of Los Angeles. She's the executive director of Positive Results Center. She is certified in so many different areas dealing with trauma, suicide, domestic violence. And of course, women that are incarcerated, it's traumatic. So won't you welcome my dear sister friend, Candy Lewis. Thank you so much for being with us today, Candy.
Thank you so much, my sister Jewel. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
You know, your resume is so rich, and I would like for you to tell the audience a little bit more about what you do, because you are definitely a hero in our community.
Thank you. Well, Positive Results Center is a nonprofit. We address trauma from a cultural and age perspective. We specialize in teen dating, domestic and interpersonal violence, sexual assault and bullying, and we do so by teaching leadership and healthy relationships. And we work with youth and young adults because we know that violence and abuse begins in the womb. It doesn't begin at 20, 30, 40 years old when you're in an abusive relationship. And so we work with youth and young adults, and we help them to understand what violence and abuse is. They already know it, but no one is really talking to them about it in real talk conversation. which is what we do. And we give them all the skills and tools that we have to teach them to be peer advocates and ambassadors so that they can go back in the community and talk to their friends and family. And because very often when abuse happens, especially to youth and young adults, they tell their friends. And it usually happens that they'll say something like, well, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. So we give them those skills of what to say and what to do, as well as what not to do. And we also work with providers and educators, and we help them to understand what trauma looks like, especially from the perspective of a youth and a person of color. And we do special events, and those are some of the things that we do.
Well, Candy, we are focusing on how this pandemic, this horrible pandemic, has affected those that are incarcerated. Is there anything you could share with us, insights, stories, tools, strategies? How are women being affected by this COVID 19? And even though now the curve has lowered, did you have any insight as to what was happening at the peak of the COVID 19 when they were not getting any protection, not getting any vaccines, not getting any support?
Yes, well, let me just first say that every woman who has been imprisoned feels very much isolated and disconnected from family and community, and they are not treated with kindness or respect. There's so many um, horrible situations that are happening in prison, even to this day. And so that's the first thing. Know that women and men that are imprisoned feel disconnected. They feel isolated, and they feel very much like animals in certain cases because they're not treated with the
Yeah.
respect, kindness, and consideration that they need to have. Very often, there are so many women that are in prison for protecting themselves from abusive relationships. And so the abuse that they experienced continued on because they were victimized and put in prison and then continue to be victimized. And they're not receiving the services and the programs that they need. So that's first. Second off, at the height of COVID, people were terrified because we're talking about on the outside, um, keeping social distance and making sure that we wash our hands and that we have gloves and all these other kinds of things. Those were not accessible to people in prison. You have to remember that people that are in prison or in jail, that the jails were meant to hold a certain number of people. But because of the war on drugs, which really is the war on Black and Brown communities, and that has imprisoned them, the jail population has just increased significantly. So if there's, let's say, 10 people in a jail, there's actually now 100 people in the jail. So they're not able to social distance, they're not able to have the same freedoms and flexibilities. Also, the most important part was that they were no longer able to connect with their family. So their friends and loved ones that were coming to visit them, they're no longer able to do that. And so imagine yourself being in prison in a small room that is less than the size of a small bedroom, and there could be 2 to 4 people in that room. And the only thing that you had to look forward to was either a letter or a visit from a loved one, and that was completely shut down. Letters came, but they didn't come as frequently, and visits went completely away. So now they're nervous because they don't know if they're going to die because of the horrific situations that are in prisons. And they also were concerned about their family members who were no longer able to work, were losing homes, were losing just their place of safety and their ability to connect with their loved one.
Do you know how the women are maintaining and sustaining their faith, their sense of not being forsaken by God, feeling like they still have hope? You know, because when you said that there are women who are in prison because they've been abused and then they defended themselves and now they're being abused even more, that just struck my heart like, oh my God, that's just like double jeopardy. And now they got the COVID on top of that. But I'm just wondering, how does a woman maintain her faith and sense of hope when she's had all of these arrows of adversity that coming at her, just attacking her spirit. What would you
Yeah.
say to that?
Well, I would say that the women that are behind bars have built their own family. They have really learned to support one another, to love on one another, to build faith and trust in one another. And it became a necessary part that became also a very beautiful part. So the things that they don't have from their family at home, they've actually been able to build a community, a family, someone to love them. There's the big mama, there's the supporter. There are people there that are praying for them, that are doing their hair. And these are all people that are in prison. And so that has been their saving grace that they've learned. You know, we as women are resilient. We will fight a battle until we are no longer breathing. And so they are also fighting the battle inside and behind bars, and they have not given up. So that is the beautiful part of it. It is also the unfortunate part because, Jewel, honestly, I believe it is about 67% of women who are behind bars because of the abuse that they have experienced or because of that abusive relationship. We have women that are behind bars for killing their abuser who has beaten and abused them horrifically for years. We also have women that are behind bars because they decided to stay with their abuser, and the services came along and said, "You're staying and your children are here, so we're taking the kids and you might go to jail as well." And then, of course, there's the occasion where she has decided to protect herself, and that person who abused her turned around and claimed abuse. And so she's in jail. Those are some horrific truths to the reality. And then there's also the fact that sometimes women who have been molested because of sexual predators, and they have done things. Maybe they've stolen some food or clothing. I know a young lady who went to jail because she was hungry and she needed sanitary items. And she was in prison because she needed sanitary items and couldn't afford to buy them.
Yeah,
These are horrific truths
it
about.
is. And when you
Mhm.
said that, Candy, it did trigger a memory that my mother's sister was one of the first African American police officers, sheriff deputy, and she fought the system by saying the black and the brown inmates are not getting sanitary supplies, that the Caucasian community were able to have them. So this inequity, this disparity, this injustice is still continuing on today. And you've helped us to make sure we don't forget that. So thank you for that, Candy. And I want our blenders to please stay with us because our wonderful Dr. Karen is going to continue this conversation with Candy Lewis, one of our community sheroes. Stay with us.
welcome back. In case you're just joining us, Dr. Joel and Mrs. Candy Lewis have just been sharing a lot of very important information about how COVID-19 has impacted incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men and women, women in particular, and their respective families. Mrs. Lewis has been so gracious to stay with us, and I'm so glad she did, because we're going to be talking about the psychological and emotional effects of COVID-19, especially on the women who have been incarcerated. Mrs. Lewis, thank you so much for staying with us. It's so nice to meet you.
Dr. Karen, it's my pleasure.
I was so pleased to hear about your organization and what they're doing specifically for persons who've gone through much trauma. I mean, when I thought about what you do, I thought, wow, you deal with a lot. The Positive Results Center is making a difference in the community, I'm sure. Could you enlighten our audience on more of what you have seen specifically with, let's say, the women who have been incarcerated, who are incarcerated, and particularly their families? What have the psychological and emotional effects been?
Well, as you can imagine, they have been up and down. First off, COVID-19 was such a devastating event because we are, as human beings, we're social. And so we like to talk, we like to interact, and we like to be around family. And especially Black and Brown people, we love family, and that is how we operate. So being unable to connect with family, to see them and reach out and touch them, and in some cases even to hear them, has been extremely devastating. And so one of the things that people have been doing is doing a lot more mailing pictures, mailing cards, sending art back and forth to one another, because that is a way that they are able to build a relationship and stay in connection. And it was really hard, especially at the very beginning, when everyone was so unaware of what this really was and how it was going to impact people, and hearing about the deaths. So the families at home were tremendously scared because they were afraid that their loved ones that were behind bars would die before they had an opportunity to connect with them or even get them released. You remember there was a big push to get people to be released from prison, and many were not released, and some have died, which has been very unfortunate. But it's been more the families on the outside that have died and unable to reconnect with their loved ones behind bars.
That's what I was thinking about. You're almost like a person and a mediator, someone who is able to help both within and without. And even if you're not within, just the help that you can give to the families of the women who are incarcerated must be such a comfort to them. I really liked what you said about the mailing. I didn't even think of that. Yes, they can't see each other or talk to each other, but they can still connect. And that was really a great way to find some glimmer of hope in a hopeless situation. Did you
Absolutely.
Did you see anything else that you can remember that helped persons to cope better, to deal with the fears that you spoke about and the sense of isolation?
Well, as I said earlier, talking with Jewel, is that the women behind bars have really built a community and a family. And so it became really important for them to lean on each other more. And that is how they were able to navigate past the deep and darkest parts of COVID. And then also on this side, to be able to connect with maybe someone who was in prison and has been released, just to get an idea of what's been going on. It's been very hard for both the families on this side that have loved ones behind bars, as well as those that have been behind bars. And then let's talk about those who have recently come home. that's been a very difficult transition because in some cases, some people have been behind bars before cell phones were even existed. And when Metro was RTD and the city of Los Angeles doesn't look the way it does. So some of the programs, including ones that we do for people returning to the community, have been very important. I think it's important that we remember that when people went away and went to prison, they were one person, but their trials, their tribulations, their life experiences have really formed them to be a different person on this side. And so it's important that we remember that even as we have changed and we're no longer the people we used to be, that our family and loved ones are as well. And so it's important to just take your time with your family, to be open and honest, to be accepting, and not to rush and expect them to learn and be, because this world has changed. And COVID has really been a game changer as well. So I think it's just important that we exercise patience and grace. Exercise patience and grace.
Mrs. Lewis, thank you so much for sharing all of those insights with us. Did you see any other evidence of persons who really just didn't give up? They really decided, I'm going to press through this. I need to survive this. Can you give our viewing audience some idea of what persons did to cope with so much trauma?
Absolutely. So as I said, the women behind bars and even the men, the people behind bars bonded with each other. They really supported one another. They really put together mailing campaigns to elected officials, to local leaders, as well as their family and friends. Their family and friends advocated on behalf of them. They partnered with other nonprofit organizations to make sure that their loved ones were able to come home. They advocated to the governor and even our ex-president to make sure that their family members could come home alive. So there was a lot of advocacy work done. There are many, many, many organizations that really put their boots to the ground to make sure that family and friends, those behind bars, those were left here at home, were able to see their loved ones again. I think the biggest thing is that families just learn to connect more in old school writing letters, and because most people don't realize how expensive it is to make a phone call to or from prison. So the letter writing was really a lifeline. If you can do anything else, if you can't do anything else, write a letter to someone behind bars, or if you know someone who has a family member that is behind bars, provide them with paper and pen and stickers and coloring papers, especially if they have kids, so that the kids can send a letter. I can tell you that every man and woman who's behind bars, when the mailman comes through, the place gets quiet. It's like a pin. You can hear a pin drop a mile away because they want to hear their name. And that is where that little lifeline comes in. To be able to hear your name, that a loved one is thinking about you, is the biggest blessing that could possibly be given to anyone.
Mrs. Lewis, that was so special. When you talked about the mail and people writing, I remember as a child writing to people, and it meant so much to me to get a letter. I really am glad that persons are using opportunities like this to go back to the basics in that way. Is there anything else you would want to share with our audience about how to help or encourage or cope with someone who has been incarcerated or just been through similar traumatic experiences?
Absolutely. So there's really three things that you could do. First, be patient. Remember that that person, when they left home, you don't remember how they left, but we remember that time. So they may have left prior to having cell phones. And so they have to really get reacclimated to the community and to life again. And being outside where someone's not telling them what to do 24/7. let's also give them a little grace. We have to be patient and offer grace to them. And one of the biggest things that we can do now, we're finding that art therapy really helps. And art therapy could be in the form of talk therapy, music therapy, or drawing, because sometimes we don't have the words to communicate how we're feeling. So give them some coloring pads and paper and pens and let them really just be able to express themselves. You may find that the person that you love, the person that you haven't seen in years, is still there, and they're actually blooming into this beautiful person and maybe even an artist. So art, grace, and patience. And don't forget, love. Love them with your whole heart, and let's not judge. Because you know what? I think each one of us has experienced some things, and sometimes we have just been lucky that we weren't the one who got caught. So, grace.
I totally agree with what you just said, Mrs. Lewis. I really encourage everyone, pay attention. You got some very, very sound wisdom there from Mrs. Lewis, and we thank you so much for staying with us and allowing us to ask you these questions and sharing so much of what you've learned through the ministry that the community outreach that you're doing. We really encourage you to keep doing very, very good work.
Thank you.
Now, viewers, blenders, there is much more coming. Dr. Lisa, Dr. Jewel, and I are about to talk about self-care. So remember those notepads, remember those, devices. We're going to be right back, so don't go anywhere. Blenders, we're back, and we're so grateful that you decided to stay with us. We are very pleased to welcome our final guest for today's show, and that is the Executive Director of 10 Toes In, Ms. Darlene Burke. Ms. Burke, welcome. Would you mind telling us what 10 Toes In is and what do you do?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kieran. I appreciate that introduction. First of all, again, I'm Darlene Burke. I am the founder and executive director of 10 Toes In. We are a mentorship and a domestic violence prevention program. We support, we educate, and we empower couples during and after incarceration. We also educate society about the dynamics of this very unique relationship. So that's what 10 Toes In represents.
We're so happy to have you here with us, Darlene. The work that you're doing with supporting families, reintegrating, and helping relationships thrive after incarceration is that information I just so appreciate, because there's so many people that need you and need that support. But I think that you may have seen a new type of experience with supporting people coming out of incarceration and reintegrating with COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about how things have changed for you and how you've had to shift what you do to support this experience with the pandemic?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're very active in the community, and we host and facilitate support group meetings. And so the impact that COVID has had on how we interact with our brothers, we call them our brothers and our sisters, has been very limited. And that has caused, I'm not going to say a disconnect, because we were still meeting on Zoom, but it's something about being in person with our brothers and our sisters, and being able to hug each other, and being able to sit around the table and eat and fellowship and talk about the challenges or even talk about the successes. But COVID has definitely had an impact when it has come to us actually getting together and being in one space, right? With our brothers coming home from incarceration, what has really kind of prevented them from doing things is if they go into transitional living, which typically they do, because most of our brothers are former lifers. So if you're a former lifer, you have to go into transitional housing. Well, because of the restrictions, they're not able to go and get their driver's license, their social security cards, and things of that nature to help them get on their feet. So they're kind of stagnant. And so it's a little frustrating for them, because they want to get out and they want to start to make things happen. They want to, get a job, start meeting people and things of that nature. But COVID has definitely played a huge role in preventing that from happening.
Wow, that's so interesting, because with the court systems and everything closed and all the systems closed, has it been a challenge? I mean, because if they're re-entering, these are requirements that they need. How have those requirements shifted for them?
Well, they're still able to talk to their parole agents. I mean, that's the number one thing, making sure you have open communication with your parole agent. But again, if you're trying to get your social security card, which is what they're trying to do, maybe they don't have birth certificates or driver's license, all the things that they may be getting from a governmental agency, that's definitely a problem. That's an obstacle for them.
Right. And so have you seen like the experience of any trauma or challenges from when they came out? Because they're coming out during the pandemic, when they've had to experience all of these challenges inside, right?
Absolutely.
How has that affected them?
Well, number one, with our brothers and our sisters coming home, it's a challenge, because you got to remember, I know a lot of the people that 10 Toes In services, they've been gone for a long time. So when I say a long time, from 15 years to 43 and a half years, right? So when they come home, it is a brand new world. So dealing with COVID, in addition to trying to reintegrate successfully, it can be very challenging for them. And the biggest thing that I've seen with our brothers is that balancing being home, balancing being overwhelmed with all of these new things that you are encountering, trying to balance between your partner and your family. So I would say that would be the biggest challenge dealing with COVID with them.
And has your organization received any more support, or any, not just from funding, but from because so many people were kind of pushed into their own little world during COVID, and I could think about it from the perspective of, we're looking at your organization as being this amazing support system, but a lot of people were trying to just take care of their support systems, right? How has that affected you? Do you what kind of extra support do you need?
that I get or that I need?
Both. Listen, this is what our platform is all about.
Okay, well, that I get. My board of directors, they are awesome. And, I have if I ask my brothers or my sisters to step up, if I need them, to help with we always have food at our meetings, or, if I need them to help me in any way, they're there. But on a consistent basis, you're looking at her. You're looking at the person
Ah.
who pretty much, is at the forefront with 10 Toes In. So, but I'm very grateful for my board of directors as well as the sisters and the brothers. Now, I am the only person right now with 10 Toes In, the executive director, so to speak. But we need lots of help. We need, volunteers that will treat this as a job. We need funding. I have become very innovative being the executive director of 10 Toes In to keep things going, especially during this pandemic.
Yeah, well, listen, blenders, you hear her, right? We need help. They need support. And this is such an important, re-entry, because recidivism is such a big issue, especially in our communities, right? It's such a huge issue. So I know you wanted to ask a quick question, Dr.
Sure, Darlene. I'm glad you're still standing because I see
Thank
what
you.
you do.
Me too.
Your board must be really supportive. But I do want you to really be able to be well while you do this work. I see you have support groups set up for different, brothers, sisters. I see you have, courses that you offer. There's so much that you do here. I really want persons to be aware of what you're doing. So even when they think of volunteering, they can see the different ways they can volunteer. I just want to find out quickly, if you could tell me, do you see any significant mental health differences between the men and the women who leave prison? Anything?
Well, as far as the mental health is concerned, I think, they're coming from a traumatic experience, right? Anytime you are going into custody, whether it's jail or prison, you're stripped of your identity, so to speak. So instead of you being this woman or this man, you're now reduced to this number, right? And you're treated a certain way being in custody. So coming home, there is trauma. There is definitely trauma. There's lots of, I'm not going to say lots of mental illness, but there is some, if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with a bipolar disorder or what have you. What I've learned from my brothers that we have as a part of 10 Toes In is that they become very emotionally detached, right? Because in prison, you can't show your emotions because that will be seen as a sign of weakness. So coming home to your wife or your significant other or your children or whoever, you may think that, wow, he's very cold. He doesn't care. But it's not that. It's just that he is so used to not showing his emotions. So when you talk about the mentality of incarceration or post-incarceration, that's one of the things that you're going to deal with.
Yeah. Well, we so appreciate you, Darlene. I know that the work that you're doing is God sent, and God bless you for it. Listen, Blender, she needs some help. She needs some volunteers. She needs some support. Support her. Support 10 Toes In. And listen, this has been an amazing conversation so far, but we have more for you. So we'll be right back.
It's time for the Random Talk.
Welcome back, Blenders. This has been such an amazing show so far. We've had an opportunity, my co-hosts have had an opportunity to interview women who've had boots on the ground, who've supported not just those that have been incarcerated, but those coming home, re-entering, and dealing with all the challenges, especially the challenges as it related to COVID-19 and the challenges that they've had either in prison or coming out of prison, right? So the key is understanding that they have support, they have hope. There's so much to look forward to, and we want to continue that discussion. We want to help you understand the self-care from our perspective, right? From the perspective of mind, body, and spirit, because that's what we hear all about on the Blend Talk, right, ladies? So as we talk about this self-care and ways to take care of your mind, body, and spirit, I think about, the lifestyles, the ways that, not just the things that they experienced in prison, but what can they do coming out? And listen, I know that on the outside, people can't eat a good diet or don't have access to good food or access to the understanding of what nutrition really does for the body. So I always think the first thing I want to do is support someone in learning how to eat better, to use food as medicine, to understand like that we eat to be nourished, and not just our bodies, but we nourish our minds and our spirits, right, ladies?
Yes, and I find, Dr. Lisa, when you speak, I find there's so much overlap with what I would want to say, because a lot of what I want my clients and persons that I help to know is that there is a correlation. So the way they're treating their bodies will affect their minds. And when I'm thinking about the type of persons we're trying to focus our attention on today, I think of persons who have been through trauma. I mean, let's just summarize it. It was traumatic to be incarcerated, and it was doubly traumatic to have to face COVID while being incarcerated.
Yes.
So we have to think about, how do you get beyond those traumatic experiences? Because you're going to have things like depression, you're going to have sleeplessness, insomnia, you're going to be anxious all the time, looking over your shoulder all the time, and even paranoia because you were so exposed to germs that you couldn't see, and you didn't even know if you started sniffling, are you going to die? So people would have had to face the possibility of death long before they had planned to. So I would want to say to those who are listening, the self-care that you will need to do is to, first of all, be aware that your mental health is important. Some persons are uncomfortable with that conversation, but you really do have to face it, because as Dr. Lisa said, it can manifest in your body, but I'm telling you, something is going on in your mind. You have to face that this is real. You can't see it, but you can feel it. There's help for it. There are professionals for it. There are a lot of self-help information on the internet. I know it's the internet, but you can trust a lot of it. And I'm saying, talk to the people who love you. When you came home, who embraced you, who welcomed you, those people are the ones that you should be willing to say, hey, this is what it was like. It was so hard. Just talk therapy. That's what that is. Yes.
This is such good, because this is good information, because like that stuffing down, like that holding it in, that keeping it close to the vest, that also causes physical discomfort as well, right? A lot of people don't recognize that constipation is a form of that, right? It's like it manifests as constipation because you're holding in, you're not releasing, right? And so that whole concept of I mean, when she talked about how the men coming out, especially after being inside for 30 years or so, they have to shut down emotionally. How do they then learn to open back up and learn to expose themselves so that they can become mentally and emotionally and physically healthy? So this is great.
Well, whether you were locked down on the outside or locked down on the inside, we have to always practice some self-care. And I think about how by us living in this technology age, do you blenders, when you first wake up in the morning, do you spend some time with God, or do you go check your social media? Do you check your email and your text messages? Being locked down is something that can help you to change your priorities and realize that the Creator gave me another day to breathe, another day of grace. Let me not rush. Let me just, when I wake up in the morning, I lay there quietly. And as my eyes open, like, oh, I just got two gifts. My eyes opened up. And then I just go right into praising God and thanking God, before I go into my routine. So I would say that is an act of self-care, is to take care of your temple and connect with the Spirit. Connect with the fact that you were allowed to wake up and see a new day. And the second thing I would say, is how do you feed your spirit? Is it through reading the Word of God? Is it doing some worship music? Is it, stretching? Is it, what do? Do you have any type of a routine to feed your spirit? And then I would say to you, please remember the power of your words. The Word of God says that we eat by the fruit of our lips. And sometimes we're poor in spirit because we're speaking so down about ourselves. We're focusing on what we don't have. We're focusing on what's going wrong. And I challenge myself and everyone around me to switch that up and focus on what's going right. Because if the words from my mouth are positive and uplifting and full of gratitude, then my life is going to reflect that. But if I'm speaking what I don't have and I'm complaining and I'm worried, my life is poor. Not just in material things, but just poor in my health and poor in my thinking and poor in the things that will show up in my life. So I would say to you that is an act of self-care, is to be careful of what you are saying, because your words have power. And whether you use the word prayer or declaration or affirmation, speak words of power. Speak words of love, showing patience and grace and understanding towards those who have been incarcerated, unfortunately. But we also have to know how to show patience and grace towards ourselves. That is an act of self-care. Don't allow guilt and shame to consume you and put your beautiful light out.
Yes, and I always think of baby steps, because after you've been in a space, in a place where you haven't had the opportunity to do and be who you want to be. I always tell my patients, small steps. It's the baby steps. Don't try and take on everything all at once, because you can't create habits and behaviors when you're trying to do too much. You can do the little things really matter. They really, really matter. So again, now you guys see why this is my favorite segment. We get to share so many nuggets, and I hope you've been taking copious notes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
So we have been blending together so many aspects of how the COVID-19 has impacted those that are incarcerated, and the conversation and the insights that we gained have been just kind of heartbreaking, but also hopeful. Thanks to our guests, Mrs. Candy Lewis and Darlene Burke of 10 Toes. We are so excited that you continue to be with us, and you're growing with us, and you are getting into the flow, and you're seeing how we're blending together the aspects about the mind, the body, and the spirit during the pandemic. My sister host, what were your favorite parts of today's episode?
Well, as usual, I'm so glad I get to go first. So I really appreciated what Darlene Burke is doing. Can I tell you? I want to partner with her in some way. I'm not sure if I can, but I believe she can really make a significant difference and bring hope to so many individuals and families that just feel like society has just discarded them.
Yes.
Yeah, and when Mrs. Lewis talked about, the passion and the concern for knowing that when people are inside, they need letters, they need information, they need love, and because of COVID, they didn't get a lot of that. They didn't have a lot of that, and that just really, I never thought about it from that perspective. The things that I was just thinking about it from the general challenges that everyone had, but that lack of, I mean, because that's the only hope sometimes they have, right? And so that really touched me. Yeah, that was it for me.
I love how this show is pulling back the curtain, and not only are our blenders being inspired, but we are being touched by the guests. We're being empowered, and we're seeing how we can continue this movement called the Blend Talk to actually talk about issues that really can empower and embrace our community. And I want to talk as we close today, because I want to share a tool that I use when I'm feeling stuck, or when I'm feeling locked down, or when I'm feeling like, life is not moving in the direction I want to do, is I have a vision board. I know I can't show everything, but I want to talk about the power of visualization. I want to talk about how the Word of God says, speak those things that be not as if they are. So when we talk about and what we want to do, when we visualize, when we use the capacity that God has given us, imagination, if you feel locked down in your job, if you feel locked down in depression, if you feel locked down like you're just not living your best life, I want to encourage you to start visualizing. Use your spiritual eye. Use your third eye and begin to see how you want to be, how you want to live, what you want to do, how you want to show up. There's great power in that. And I found it to be so powerful for me. I've actually seen me manifest things that are on my vision board, and this is just one of them. So we love here at The Blend sharing with you ideas and tools and strategies and solutions so that you can live your best life. We thank you for being with us today. Make sure you're with us next week. It's going to be awesome again. We are blending together encouragement, empowerment, education, self-esteem, so much, because we love you and we appreciate you. I am Jewel Diamond Taylor, also known as the Self-Esteem Doctor. And here on the Blend Talk, I represent the spirit.
And I'm Dr. Karen McGibbon, and I represent the mind.
And I'm Dr. Lisa Lewis, and I represent the body.
And together, we represent the Blend Talk. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Mind, body, and spirit.